All right, here's the website to Crip Camp. If anybody wants to check it out.
Amina, I'm just going to jump in real quick and announce to everybody we're going to get started here in just a minute. So if you need to grab yourself some food or take a bio break, now is the time to do it.
Thanks, James. Let's see. And I said I wasn't going to just play all the songs in their entirety, but we've been just chatting and talking and it's disappointing. I just watched Pride, and I did not know about that. It's about the LGBT community in the UK, and it's a really, really good movie. Someone said, I'm here for Annie. Does Annie have the baby? Is Jack online? Let me scroll through my people to see if he's
here.
Can we spotlight the baby?
I was going to say, let's spotlight Jack.
Can we spotlight the baby?
There's Jack. Oh, she's dancing. She's dancing. Do you pronounce that Jahala? Shauna, would you mind letting us know how you pronounce that?
Sure. It's like hayaya. There's not an exact translation, but like someone will say something and we all respond hayaya. So like power to the people, sort of.
Got it. I like it. Thank you. Look at Jack. I love that little, like, she's got a little, like, I don't know what you call it, in the front. We are here because you were there. Yes. Let the baby speak, Laura said. What's your favorite protest song, Jack?
Jack, do you have a favorite protest song?
Yeah. Jack, when mommy's not moving fast enough, what is your favorite? What is your favorite, Jack? Oh, yes. Andrea, Seen on Radio, seasons 2 and 4. All of it's great, but yes, Seeing White is the most absolutely amazing. Since we're talking about podcasts, we got about 5 minutes left. This wasn't a question, but this made me think about it. What are your favorite podcasts to listen to? And it could be fun or anything, or it can be about, civil rights and that sort of thing. But what are folks listening to? What have you gotten a lot out of when it comes to, racism, anything really? I have tons. But Seen on Radio, we already talked about Throughline. Anything else? Oh, okay. I need to make Jocelyn the host again. Oh, yeah. Sorry, folks were texting me and I'm like all looking at this chat. All right, Jocelyn, you are host. Your hustle. Fatima, that's great. Yep. Stamped. I haven't listened to that yet. The Read, it is pure comedy and shenanigans. The Read is a good, I need to not think about this stuff, or I need to laugh at the stuff that's going on. Girl Tracks Black History. I've not heard of these things. Louder Than a Riot is amazing. Code Switch is also amazing. The Black Language Podcast, have not heard of that. All My Relations have not heard of. The Breakdown.
We should curate these and we can send them out to everybody.
Yep, we really should. We really should. Let's see. Since we only have 4 minutes, I am going to end this with a song, a quick piece of a song that, there we go. So if you want to dance, get your dance out, stretch a little bit. Small doses, I'm saying. Jack is grooving over there.
James, can you share the PDF to the program in the chat so people can open that if they need to see it?
But I'm sharing this because John Lewis, there's lots of videos of him dancing to this song.
Mm-hmm.
He loves this song. So that's the last song. The Black Unconscious. Oh yeah, we gotta curate this list. I need to know of these. I'm going to give you one more chorus, get it out before I stop sharing. It's Jack. Someone can't hear the music, probably because it's kind of low, because we have a captioner and they couldn't hear when I had it louder. So, you know, I'll give you the last like few bars on the louder. All right. Thank you all so much for participating. I am going to stop sharing my screen here. Why won't it let me stop? I'm not sure if it stopped sharing what I was sharing, so.
Still says on my screen that you're sharing computer sound.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying. I've never shared computer sound, so I just click on it to get off of it, right?
And Andrea, I have brought you forward into the spotlight.
This is the spotlight.
Yeah, this is the spotlight. Welcome.
Sharing, because for some reason.
Amina, maybe log out and log back in. That's what I do whenever I have a problem. Does anyone else do that? Awesome. Okay, so this is the spotlight, and you can see behind me a screenshot of, I think it's last year's Teach the Speech in Copley Formal. So this is typically what we look like, and we were attempting to recreate that scene here. So hello, everyone. I'm Andrea Whistler. I serve as Executive Director of the Center for Social Justice here at Georgetown. And on behalf of the amazing and beautiful individuals who comprise our Teach-In Planning Committee, Amina, Jemay, Maya, Jocelyn, and James, thank you so much for being here and for participating in this virtual iteration of our annual event. So I wonder if any of you woke up this morning like me and realized it's only Tuesday. We continue in this intense week as we attempt to process the violence of white supremacy, domestic terrorism, and an attempted coup. Many of us are seeking ways to stay grounded in the midst of so much uncertainty. And some of us in our community are in the midst of truly deep suffering. This is all within the confines of social distancing and the dual pandemics of the coronavirus and racism, and what I read this morning as described as politically induced misery. So it is our shared hope that by taking part in this community gathering today, reading and listening to Dr. King's 1965 speech, Our God is Marching On, and the 1963 speech of the late Honorable Congressman John Lewis, when he was head of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, that we can recommit ourselves and the work of this coming semester to racial and social justice. So let's draw strength today, remembering Dr. King, Congressman Lewis, and all the brave and loving souls who have gone before us. Let us draw strength from each other as well as we work for justice, healing, and renewal. It is so much better to be in all of this together. So a few technical notes for our time together. We purposefully chose Zoom's gathering setting as opposed to the webinar setting for today's event. We're attempting to recreate that feeling of our in-person event, which purposefully starts every year a half an hour early with a meet and greet and community building over a meal. Please take care of yourself and your body. In the next hour and a half, you are welcome to eat, drink, take a break, stretch, stand up, sit down, whatever you need to do. Turn your camera on and off. I'm sorry if you can hear the kiddos upstairs. I also know that many of us will also have like half of an eye on the news, some Twitter feed, some news, pinging us at all times these days. Thank you for our colleagues, Kara at Ad Astra, who's providing the services to caption our event today. If you'd like to see the captions, you can turn them on in your own Zoom settings. We are also recording today's event. If you prefer, your name is not viewable on the recording, just change that setting on your Zoom, but if you choose to speak, you will be recorded. James will share multiple times the Google document link for the program for today's event in the chat. The program is also linked to the Google Calendar invitation and also to our csj.georgetown.edu/teachthespeech webpage. And it includes a link to Amina's awesome soundtrack, who, as she said, is in honor of Congressman Lewis, who protested, marched, got arrested, preached, and also always danced. So our next hour together includes 3 mini keynotes, and each esteemed speaker will be introduced by a Georgetown colleague. We have asked our speakers to offer their reflections on these speeches, and Jocelyn will use this magical Zoom spotlight feature so that speaker will appear in view on your screen. Feel free to use the Zoom emojis and chat your gratitude to our speakers. After this hour, I'll move us into a very short stretch and bio break with a song, and then Jocelyn will Zoom spotlight our 3 speakers and our Georgetown colleague, Todd Shell-Young, who will facilitate a short dialogue and Q&A session. So at that time, please offer any questions or comments you have through the chat. And if you need to leave the Zoom and then return, you will need to select speaker view again to see that spotlight. Maya from the Office of Student Equity and Inclusion will conclude our event. And while our gathering ends at 1:30, we know the conversation continues, and we encourage you to reach out to a member of the Teach-In Planning Committee if you'd like to conspire with a colleague about bringing these speeches into your educational space this semester. In case you missed it last night, I highly recommend taking time, about 45 minutes, to enjoy the Facebook Live event. You'll find it on Georgetown University's Facebook page, and James will put the link in the chat too. You don't have to have Facebook to see it. Hosted by President DeGioia and Office of the President. This is the annual John Thompson Jr. Legacy of a Dream Award ceremony, which we typically have at the Kennedy Center, and we had last night on Facebook. This year's awardee, Christopher Bradshaw of the food justice organization Dreaming Out Loud. He offers critically necessary remarks, and Reverend Nolan leads his choir in a new rendition of his compelling song, Selflessness. And we lift up the memory of Coach Thompson, who passed away this fall. There are also special guest appearances by sociology professor Yuki Kato, Chef Jose Andres, and Reverend Ebony Grissom. So sometime in the early fall, which feels like both yesterday and a decade ago, this Teach-In Planning Committee came together. and committed fully to pulling together this event for our Georgetown community. We didn't know what day the spring semester was starting. We were covering multiple frozen vacancies in our units. Election day was looming, and many of us have never even met in person. But our no matter what we're going to pull this off attitude got us here today. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we won't experience some glitches or Zoom mistakes in the next 90 minutes. So we simply ask for your grace and patience as we traverse our time together, and also worry at the same time whether our kiddo is on their next virtual third grade class, or if there's a major political travesty transpiring on the last day of the current administration in our beloved hometown of Washington. A final shout out of gratitude to Kira from CSJ and college senior Nazele for stepping in on support on tasks at the last minute, and Caitlin from Candles, who's providing tech support. Jocelyn will now turn the Zoom spotlight to my colleague, Jamae Brown, Associate Director in the Center for Student Engagement, who will introduce our first speaker. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Hello. I am Jamae Brown. I serve as the Associate Director in the Center for Student Engagement. One of my main responsibilities on this planning committee was to identify a student speaker. And since I think I know some of the best, greatest, most entertaining students at Georgetown, I was super hyped to take that on. I immediately thought of one of my favorites, Miss Fatima Diefan, and I am delighted that she said yes, that she is about to share her genius with all of us. I'll read her bio now. Fatima Diefan is a senior in the college studying African American Studies and Government with a minor in Theater Performance Studies. Looking at the intersections of her various disciplines, Fatima is currently working on an autobiographical play reflecting Black womanhood. Fatima enjoys communion with the creative minds of the world seeking dreams of Black liberation. If everybody can do me a favor, and again, welcome with virtual hugs, love, praise, one of my favorite students and dear friend, Miss Fatima Diefan.
Thank you, thank you. I'm feeling the virtual claps. I promise you guys right now I'm super sweaty, so I'm trying to settle myself down, but welcome everyone, and thank you, Jamae, for that wonderful introduction. I'm excited to be sharing this space with you all today as we reflect on Martin Luther King Jr. and John Lewis. And although these speeches took place in the 60s, the spirit of activism they hold continues to influence our response to the challenges that we face today. I am a second semester senior in what I call a double dose pandemic, the threat of the virus and the threat of white supremacy. And what I can tell you as a student, being enlightened and having all of this information and learning has not made any of my experiences better. Everything that I come to engage with is always filtered through this intellectual understanding of the world. And it's an eclectic educational intellectual framework that requires radical imagination. And you tell people, you know, government, African American Studies and theater, and they're a little confused, and they hit you with that. So what are you going to do after college? And I don't have that answer now. Again, it's the double dose pandemic, but I know that I am in the business of performativity. And with that being said, I would love for all of you to join me in a moment of performance that is just a meditation for us to center ourselves as we engage with this material today. So for the sake of time, I'll guide you through the meditation, but make yourself comfortable and grounded, however that means to you. So for me right now, my feet don't touch the floor. So I'm gonna wrap them around each other so I feel a little stable. Kind of think about where your hands are. I'm just gonna set mine on my knees so I can feel balanced. And just find your natural breath and just exist in that for a few moments. And if you find your own rhythm, go ahead and guide yourself to breathe in and breathe out. But I understand everyone has a different natural breath. Now, as you're breathing, you can feel that breath. Give it some sense of visualization. Is it fast? Is it slow moving? And can you sense that from how it feels in your body? Do you see it? If you see it, is it linear? Do you see lines of winds, or is it just a gaseous cocoon of air? Visualize your natural breath. There's no right answer, just your truth. Now, when you take in these breaths, start to visualize that you're breathing in your surroundings, whether that be your home, your office, the kids upstairs on Zoom, the environment we're surrounded in. And as you breathe in, place that breath at the tip of your toes, the tip of each toe. Feel the breath touch your big toe, your pinky toe. Now place breath through your feet. And fill up your legs. And bring it up to your torso and through your head. You're breathing in your surroundings. How do you feel? Heavy, light, warm or cold, present? Again, it's your truth, but just note these feelings. And now take a final exhale and allow them to release and empty whatever surroundings you just breathed in. My feet is tired, but my soul is rested. When you feel called, open your eyes if you close them and refocus yourself back. And if it takes longer to, still feel the meditation, I'm going to keep my voice a little so you can keep that mindset. But for the sake of time, I'm going to continue with my reflection on these two speeches. I think it's important to offer a moment of peace, especially to those who devote themselves to gaining knowledge for liberation, because we are in a space that is exhaustive. And just reflecting on the last 2020 that I've had, like being a person that's liberation is important to, it became difficult for me to engage with people. It became difficult for me to engage with the media, my closest friends, utilize my social media properly because I needed to find a way to avoid the doom. I didn't want to go to class because curriculum that was set turned into everyday life explaining to first-year white students who are just beginning their engagement with race theory. And I found myself sacrificing my mind because I felt burdened with the task of liberation. And that's me coming from an honest perspective. And it's like you always have to be doing something, especially with having brought everything to this online format. And I realized as a writer, even when I was writing, it was hard for me not to write and think like, what service or what disservice could I be doing to my race? And instead of going outside of myself to figure out that issue, I went within, and I found within my living state that I had made myself a martyr, and a symbol of a martyr that I find to be distorted. And I bring this up in particular because one of the scariest things about 2020 for me had to have been the legacy of Breonna Taylor. And what was scary about it, I think, is that even if you just think of the memory of how her images came to the surface, they're images that are similar to the technological advancements that we have today. It's not like we're looking at old pictures and old things. So Black women could really see themselves in her. They could see themselves in her selfies. They could see themselves in her narrative. And in her death, she was crafted to become a symbol. But this symbol didn't feel like a symbol of faith. And I don't have a word for what this symbol was, but people were accompanying the beauty of her name with F the police. Is that her legacy? Like, let me know. Like, is her legacy to see a sign that says, Dear Breonna Taylor, F the police? I don't think that that is the essence of this woman whose life we didn't get to know, but is now boiled down to a traumatic death. And the reason why I bring this up in reference to MLK's speech is what he often does is talk about how much of the hardships we're facing, all of the martyrs that have been a part of the movement during the civil rights movement. And honestly, just thinking about my public school career, a lot of this context was never given to a single one of his speeches. None of the context of how many people have gone, none of the context of the police brutality. I don't think any of that was really prevalent. But one of the things that stands out to me, I mentioned, is the emphasis of his history of the times. And I'm not going to go into detail of the exact people because it's in the resource materials, but I always wonder if they were seen as martyrs or if that's a concept that we have come to create during this time. And I bring that up because the idea of dying for the movement in the eyes of King is very different to me. It's not a physical, literal conversation. It's an interior one. And I would love to use better rhetoric than dying. I apologize for the use of that language to everyone, but it's this self-sacrificial attitude that I think is going to be a source of hurt for people in the movement due to where it comes from. And although I would say MLK didn't necessarily see them as martyrs, but as saints. And in the case of activists, at least, they embody the spirit of liberation that symbolically carries on. But I don't want us to believe that death, pain, weight, triumph is a prerequisite for getting what you deserve. So it's now, what do we deserve? And that's not going to come from anywhere but a focus on the self. And that has to separate the ego from the spirit and nurture ourselves to be sustainable. It's difficult for people to catch on to the whole marching thing and the whole protesting thing and the whole nonviolent thing because it seems naive, but as an idea, it's a sustainable form of protest that allows for the spirit of liberation and the focus of the self as a character. I mention that because oftentimes throughout my career, I've heard pushback on MLK's egalitarian beliefs. That did turn to economic focus over time, but I think that his tactics focused on the maintenance of the spirit. And I find difficulty explaining it, but his tactic was sourced in the Christian ideals of liberation, one that doesn't come at cost, humiliation, or denial of the other. And going to John Lewis's speech, this speech made me think about, the implications of myth making within our long liberation movement. And I think myths are in direct conversation to how we view ourselves and how we want to shape our narrative. So it's a part of the whole teach the speech. There's the two speeches. There's a speech that John Lewis had originally drafted that got released. And then he had the speech that he performed for everyone that was a little different. And it made me question, who was he speaking to as him and what was the purpose? And that's a question of mindfulness because the movement is mindful. And because the movement is mindful, I believe these speeches are for Black people. John Lewis shared a sound that doesn't even sound like me. So I'm not even saying it was for Black people like me even. It sounded like it was for even like the crowd that was in front of him and the people that were with him during the marches and all of the energy and the things that they had to experience. And, I just think of like the language, how the language changes from the two and you have to read it, but it's kind of like, it's not necessarily AAVE, but if you're a fan of like Twitter conversations and TikTok and things like that, you'll find people on TikTok like saying Chile instead of Chao. And I think that the differences between those two speeches is the difference between Chile and Chao. Like old people, I think they have their own form of AAVE. The queer people got their own form. College students have their own form. And I remember when I was younger, I used to sit in my mother's bathroom and there was this book that they kept on top of the toilet. And it was a small book of speeches. And in it, of course, was MLK's speech. And I would sit there and read it. And this is like elementary school. I have a dream. And I'm like, and I'm an actress, y'all. So I'm really sitting there like on the toilet. Oh, I have it. And I don't want to make fun of MLK. I love him, but just really giving it my all with his vocal tone because I knew I had a dream. I said, hold up, let me hear what this man has to say. And I felt called to imitate him And it's not like mocking, because today I know sometimes there's humor in it because of how that speech has been used time and time again. But as a child, I was so moved to establish that fact about myself in the world. And each man's world is different, but the world of Black people, a Black woman, a Black young girl is not necessarily to dream. It's not to feel. It's not to be. And why is that? I think it's because the very iteration of a word is power. They call it spelling for a reason. I took a couple courses with Professor Board in the African American Studies Department, and one of the books that we read was called Domination and the Art of Resistance by James C. Scott. And one of the things that they do in this book, and I find myself speaking more esoterically, but they give concrete ways in which the power of symbol can take shape in life, and that there's power in perception and there's power in framework. And I think that you can really see this with the current president that's currently leaving tomorrow. The news literally doesn't make sense. Like, let's be real. And King literally mentions in his speech, the media is crafting this perception. And he mentions the populist movement and how, you'd have to go to that section because I'm not saying this all clearly, but how it started out with like the creation of Jim Crow to allow the white man to feel a need to bring Black people down. And now I feel like it's the creation of all of these, I don't have a direct answer, but the creation of all of these new political systems and just new media formats and these new conversations and back and forths that honestly don't make sense, but it's enough to feed white people into a coup, insurrection through the internet. And I'm not pressed about the presidency these days as it relates to him, but that power, as much as we are looking at it to deny it, there is a sense that we can, I don't want to say use, but think about. White people have the symbolic power thing down, but it's situated, as I mentioned, in the ego, which also allows suppressed white people to remain in their disposition while finding the need to bring others down. And segregation and separation never felt different to me. And I feel as though King was always calling for coming together. And now it's like we have many more factions in the Black community, and just not even said about in community as a whole. And I think some of this is at the hands of white supremacy. And also due to the fact that now in a new technically advanced society, we have different access to knowledge. But I call this to concern because we need to start being creative and being comfortable with being creative about revolutionary tactics. And creativity is in the soul. And that is only going to be evident if the revolution is mindful. If we understand what people are experiencing, feeling, needing. And that is why I think Black radical feminist theory excites me, because it's mindful of life and experience. It is only possible if the revolution is mindful. It is only possible if the revolution gives truth to the intuition of Black people, that which we internally nurture, our emotions, fears, desires, because that is how we are able to conceive the future that we want. So is it prophetic optimism or undeniable faith in the self? It is clear that these speeches are being delivered to people who need undeniable faith. And I can only imagine physically what it felt like to engage in those times, because I fear engaging in that type of work now. But it puts you in another sense of awareness, I think, similar to fasting. The need for faith, honesty, affirmation within your community as a source of power to continue. So there needs to be a focus on cultivating faith. And I hope you're still with me, because this is a state of being that the ego cannot be a part of. And it's not about justifying what the ego has done. It is about giving space to people to confirm that they are doing what gives them satisfaction. It is in the sense of satisfaction and alignment that people are able to organize and mobilize comfortably. So tell me what's wrong with breathing in prophetic optimism if you're taking care of yourself. This is the time more than ever that you need to take care of yourself because again, the movement is mindful. The movement is powered by the interior, and we need to protect that space and the vessel we belong to more than ever. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Fatima. There's a great deal that I would like to say to honor Michael Collins, who has joined us today. He spent a significant portion of his life partnering with Representative Lewis in order to further the work of justice in our country, but I'm eager to hear his words, so I'm going to try to keep this brief. But there's three things I want to draw attention to. First is that just as Representative Lewis was one of the most respected and important representatives in Congress, Mr. Collins was one of the most respected and important chiefs of staff. The editorial staff of the Washington Informer wrote, Michael Collins was Lewis's son in spirit while he officially served as the congressman's chief of staff since 2000. And wherever you saw Congressman Lewis, Collins was never far behind. Many of our students here, they study, they know something of the complexity of legislation, the hard-nosed negotiations, the long hours necessary for moving forward a congressperson's political agenda. And we rightly praise Representative Lewis for his agenda, his long-term agenda. And we likewise rightly praise Michael Collins for the work that went into implementing that agenda. Second is Mr. Collins' example of continuing education in order to further the work of civil rights and responsible government. Formerly, he studied at Morehouse, Emory, and our sister Jesuit University, Boston College, where he received a bachelor's degree in psychology, as well as multiple graduate degrees in business and in social work. Less formally, his work manifests what we talk about a lot around here about, that of a self-directed lifelong learner. And finally, I want to point out that Mr. Collins' public service and engagement isn't limited to the political sphere. It extends to the nonprofit and the educational sectors as well. And in particular, it's worth noting his committed work with CASA DC, which is a nonprofit organization here in the Capitol that connects specially trained volunteer court-appointed special advocates to support vulnerable and at-risk youth in foster care and the juvenile justice system. So Mr. Collins is one who recognizes that justice requires concerted effort at all levels, individual, community, and governmental. And with that, I wish to extend my sincere thanks to Mr. Collins for honoring us here today. And Mr. Collins, I now turn it over to you. Thank you.
You're on mute.
All right. Thank you so very much. I first have to thank my sister Fatima for just, it's powerful beyond measure. I'm proud to have witnessed this moment. You have taken me to another place in this short moment. And I just am honored to have heard and been a witness to you. So I wish you well. And again, thank you. Just powerful for me to sit here and collect myself, to be honest with you, to go forward. But first, let me just say thank you again and good afternoon. I first want to thank the Center for Social Justice, Mr. James Olson and Ms. Jocelyn Lewis, the Office of the President, and Georgetown University family for inviting me to speak during your annual Let Freedom Ring initiative. This is such a wonderful honor to be asked to speak to such an esteemed body. I must also share with you that this is still a pretty surreal time for me. On July 17, 2020, I lost my friend, mentor, father figure, and employer, as we, as a country, lost a hero. It's been a challenge to now having to talk about someone who allowed me to walk alongside him for over 20 years. I made a policy in our office that no one speaks in place of John Lewis. Well, that time has come, and it has been and will forever be my life's honor to share my experiences of a life with Congressman John Lewis. As for today's remarks, I've had to think about staying within the suggested context of what I've been asked to discuss, because there's so much that I could share with you, and we could be here until next Martin Luther King Day Jr. commemorations. Congressman Lewis was a man that I've come to believe, as his late wife Lillian suggested in an interview, that he was prophet-like, a man who really exemplified his truest earthly spirituality every day. In examining Congressman Lewis's 1963 March on Washington speech, where he was chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and providing a context on the contemporary relevance of his speech and its overall continuity in the work of his congressional career, I must first start at his early humble beginnings of growing up on a farm in Troy, Alabama, where he was one of 10 children, raised on 10 acres of land that was used for sharecropping and that his father bought for $300. This time defined his life as I've seen it throughout his career. It was here at an early age that his faith was instilled by his parents and grandparents. He always talked openly about raising chickens and preaching to those chickens on the farm. He wanted to become a minister and use those chickens on that farm as his congregation. He so often told the story of how he never got an amen out of the chickens, but believed they listened to him more than any colleague, and at least they bowed their head and produced eggs. Wanting to get an education and not work on the farm like his brothers and sisters, he would run to get on the school bus to get that education. Listening to an old radio at home about what was going on in the South and around the country is where he heard the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. for the first time, and he was inspired. He studied the teachings of Gandhi and Thoreau and the understanding of civil disobedience. From the time he left home to his March on Washington speech in 1963, Congressman Lewis had met Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Fred Gray, attorney for Rosa Parks, Jim Lawson. He had conducted sit-ins, gotten beaten numerous times, jailed, marched, and registered hundreds and thousands of voters, to name a few deeds. He truly understood and found what his purpose was and the true meaning for his life. Congressman Lewis truly believed that his life work, including the civil rights movement, was an extension of his faith. When he stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial that hot summer day in August, in which he describes as the day that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. transformed those marble steps into a modern day pulpit with his I Have a Dream speech. Dr. King was a true friend and a leader for Congressman Lewis. Congressman Lewis followed him and learned so much from him and his leadership and teachings. Their relationship was unique, that Congressman Lewis found himself so endeared to his life and its purpose. The notion that believing in something so meaningful that you're willing to risk your life, ultimately giving your life, was a lesson that he got from the meaning of Dr. King's life. On that historic day, Congressman Lewis just went for it, as he described. His speech was filled with so much passion and built up frustration at a time in our nation's history when the voices of marginalized people left behind needed a young leader that echoed the anger and resentment. Much like other times in our nation's history, where we've been confronted with crossroad moments in which the voices of a people needed to be heard. So much of what Congressman Lewis said in 1963 speech and its meaning has transformed over the 57 years since he delivered it at the March on Washington. But so much of it is still so very relevant and true. In fact, Congressman Lewis stayed true to his beliefs in his fight for freedom, justice, and equality. On that day, Congressman Lewis said, One man, one vote is the African cry. It is ours too. He personally believed that from his days of working in the Delta of Mississippi, registering people to vote, to marching to Selma to demonstrate the need for voting rights legislation, to being an architect of the 1965 Voting Rights Bill signed by Lyndon Johnson, to directing the Voter Education Project, an organization for ensuring voting rights to Americans in the South, to the most recent drafting and authoring of the House Resolution HR 1275, Voter Empowerment Act, which requires states to allow online voting registration, establish automatic voter registration, permit same-day voter registration, and even accept voter registration applications from individuals under the age of 18 as highlights of the bill. Registering to vote should be as easy as drinking a glass of water, Congressman Lewis said. Even more recently, as the state of Georgia turned its political pages, it was because of the work and foundation that Congressman Lewis laid that aided in that victory. Every vote must count, and let every vote be counted. He also spoke on the day about peaceful protests and the need to dramatize issues so important and necessary to the fabric of our life and society and community. Congressman Lewis never missed an opportunity to demonstrate and protest peacefully. He was arrested over 40 times in the civil rights movement, and as a member of Congress, arrested 5 times. He protested peacefully 6 times as a member of Congress. In one instance, outside the South African embassy in the ending of apartheid. He also sat in the US House of Representatives floor for gun violence and spoke up on issues related to Darfur and immigration. He participated and made protests and social action movements across the nation on issues like in women's marches, immigration, workers' rights, and there were always more. In his speech, he echoed the fear of a police state and trumped up charges for young Black people in 1963. And he continued to be vocal and not unspoken in his belief for justice and racial equality. His activism and deliberate objections to injustice never went unspoken. In the spirit of resistance and wrongdoing, Congressman Lewis's voice resounded clearer every day. His stomach sickened and his heart broke with the nation over killings of Trayvon Martin, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and so many others. In the last few months of his life, Congressman Lewis witnessed the killing of George Floyd and the outcry of its aftermath. He cried and felt like he needed and wanted to do something. It was too much to bear, facing his own demise and the heartache of a people that were at times helpless at the hands of those who were supposed to protect them. A continuum of years of injustice by some law enforcement that has never changed. On July 8th at 6 a.m., I took a very weak Congressman Lewis down to the Black Lives Matter Plaza at his request. He felt strong about the need to see it and be connected to what it stood for in such a dark time in our nation's history, similar to that in 1963. He remarked that in many ways, it was a full circle moment and a passing of a torch to a new, younger generation of activists. In the final days of his life, a friend called and said to the congressman, "Well, Congressman, what do you think of your grandchildren getting out there and marching, getting in good trouble?" He replied, "Yes." "Well, you did good." And he closed his eyes to rest. Congressman Lewis has always been a man of principle, a man of integrity. He lived his life every day with a sense of purpose. I always say that he never took anyone, anything, or any day for granted. He woke up each day as if it was a brand new day and a new start. I believe that even in the spirit of Congressman's legacy, you will find that getting in good trouble has always been necessary for him. His words have never been more true or important. When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have to speak up. You have to say something. You have to do something. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was wonderful. Just trying to pull up my notes. And as colleagues of mine know from an earlier meeting today, there may be an appearance by a cat who is waiting. She waits till I get on camera. So just ignore that if she does walk by. But again, thank you, Mr. Collins. That was a wonderful speech. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce Anderson Francois. Anderson Francois is a professor of law. He directs the Civil Rights section of the Institute for Public Representation and the Voting Rights Institute at Georgetown University Center of Law. His scholarly interests include voting rights, education law, and the history of Reconstruction and slavery. His practice encompasses federal trial and appellate litigation concerning equal protection in education, employment, discrimination, and voting rights, and marriage equality, and rights to a fair criminal trial. In 2008, the transition team of the President Barack Obama appointed Professor Francois lead agency reviewer for the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. He has provided pro bono death penalty representation to inmates before the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit and served as special assistant with the United States Commission of Civil Rights in Washington, D.C. He has testified before Congress on civil rights issues and drafted numerous briefs to the United States Supreme Court. It is my honor again to welcome Professor Anderson Francois.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this kind introduction. And most of all, thank you for the invitation to spend a few moments with you today. I am very grateful, and I'm also thankful for all the speakers and the words that they've shared with us. I want to take a moment to say a few words about the two speeches that is the subject of our discussion today. And I want to do so in the context of both the speeches themselves, their history, and also the subject matter that I tend to research and write about. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his speech, Our God is Marching on Thursday, March 25, 1965. Just a little 2 weeks over 2 weeks after Bloody Sunday on March 7, 1965, when, as Mr. Collins mentioned, Congressman John Lewis and nearly 600 people, including women and children, wearing their Sunday church outfits, gathered at Brown's Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church to march 54 miles from Selma to Montgomery to protest the killing of one of their own. Jimmy Lee Jackson, a 26-year-old Army veteran and voting rights worker, shot by an Alabama state trooper as he tried to protect his mother during a voting rights protest. As many of you know, when the marchers reached the Edmund Pettus Bridge, carrying US Highway 80 across the Alabama River, on the other side waited for them a sea of blue-helmeted, blue-uniformed Alabama state troopers, backed by several dozen more armed men, some on horseback, many carrying clubs the size of baseball bats. And as the marchers crested the top of the bridge, the trooper in charge ordered them to disperse. And when they knelt to pray, the troopers and deputized citizens charged and swept forward. And like a human wave, a blur of shirts and billy clubs and bullwhips. Without a word, one trooper swung his club against the left side of Congressman Lewis's head, and fractured his skull. In his speech, Our God is Marching On, Dr. King also referred back to the Montgomery Boys boycott of 1955, in which Black people went on strike for equal public accommodation. And in his speech in 1963, Congressman Lewis urged for the passage of what would ultimately become the Civil Rights Act of 1964, making it unlawful for racial discrimination in public accommodation. I draw these connections between the speech from 1965, the Edmund Pettus Bridge March for Voting Rights, the Montgomery Boys boycott of 1955, because there is a tragic, not to say bitter irony, that at the conclusion of the Civil War, nearly a century before Congressman Lewis nearly died on the Edmund Pettus Bridge marching for his voting rights, Tobias and Elizabeth Carter, Congressman Lewis' great-great-great-grandparents, were actually able to exercise their full voting rights. Both were former enslaved persons. They married soon after Emancipation Proclamation, both land settled in rural Alabama, and they were part of the first generation of former enslaved persons to register to vote. Similarly, in that same period, again, nearly a century before the 1965 speeches by Martin Luther King and the 1963 speech by Congressman Lewis, Black people had advocated and nearly won equal public accommodation during Reconstruction. The most interesting thing to me about Dr. King's speech, among many things, is that Dr. King situated the birth of Jim Crow during Reconstruction. One of the most striking passages in his speech is when he says, and I quote, "If it may be said of slavery era that the white man took the world and gave the Negro Jesus, then it may be said of the Reconstruction era that the Southern aristocracy took the world and gave the poor white man Jim Crow. And when his wrinkled stomach cried out for the food that his empty pockets could not provide, he ate Jim Crow, a psychological bird that told him that no matter how bad off he was, at least he was a white man, better than the Black man." This is one, though not the only instance in which Dr. King would refer back to Reconstruction. In fact, the Reconstruction era was one of the central themes of many of his speeches, including the last speech he delivered in Memphis before his assassination. And I think it is not an accident that he focused so much on Reconstruction. And that's one of the reasons I want to say a couple of words about that in focusing on his speech, because I think the idea of Reconstruction as being such a central period in our history, we're only now beginning to really grapple with. And one of the aspects of Reconstruction that I want to focus on is that Dr. King came into public recognition as a result of Montgomery Boys boycott in 1955, in which he marched and agitated for public accommodation. But it is important to understand that the Civil Rights Act of 1875, which was the last Civil Rights Act legislation Congress enacted during Reconstruction, had actually tried to accomplish that which Martin Luther King tried to march for nearly a century later in 1965, and Congressman Lewis spoke of in 1963. And the Civil Rights Act of 1875 is a very important moment in our constitutional political history for several reasons. The first is the breathtaking ambition of the original version of the Act, which was first proposed in 1871 and will outlaw discrimination and segregation by race, not only in all places of public accommodation, but also in all public schools, all universities, all church organizations, all cemeteries, and any and every institution incorporated under state and federal law. Further, the Act would have explicitly repealed and annulled any and every law, statute, ordinance, regulation, action, whether national or state, inconsistent with the act. Yes, the final version of the act that was eventually signed by Congress 4 years after it was proposed didn't include the school provision. But it is important to understand that back in 1875, the Reconstruction founders had articulated on the floor of Congress a moral ambition for the country that today not even the most progressive member of Congress would seriously propose. And the second reason to focus on that period on the act is that there is something about the legislative arc of the statute that tracked Reconstruction itself, that tracked the birth of Jim Crow. There was, if I may use that phrase, a certain awful elegance to it. The 1875 Act was first proposed in 1871 when it was still possible for Reconstruction to be made to work. It was enacted in 1875 by a lame duck Congress when Democrats took over, Republicans, and federal troops were withdrawn from the South. And it was struck down by the Supreme Court in 1883, only a decade before the Supreme Court would formalize Jim Crow as the law of the land. So to study the Act of 1875 is to see reproduced in its text, reflected in its debates, and echoed in its demise all the stranded hopes, the unfulfilled promises, and the cowardly betrayals of the Reconstruction and post-Reconstruction era. There are two awful crimes that fiction writers and historians like myself tend to commit. One is Deus ex machina, God from the machine, the unexpected plot device that suddenly reveals itself out of the blue to resolve some big problems. But the other one is the fork in the road device, the point in the story that telegraphs to the reader how characters are taking one fateful step that will seal their fate. And yet I can't help but look upon the historical and constitutional moment that Dr. King referred to in his speech in Reconstruction as truly a fateful moment, a turning point where both as a practical matter and as a constitutional matter, the United States took the step that would decide not only for nearly a century, but as a witness a week ago in DC, that we took the fateful step that would decide whether it would become a multiracial society or an apartheid state. Now, the last thing that I want to mention as to the reason why the act and that moment of Reconstruction that Dr. King spoke of is so important is that it was the first instance in which Black people had a meaningful voice in the debate and passage of laws affecting their lives. It was the first time, if you will, that we were in the room where it happened. And I think that's the reason why Dr. King focused so much of his energies in his speeches in talking about Reconstruction. And I will say this also in terms of closing by tying Dr. King and John Lewis's speeches together. I think the reason why they focus so much on Reconstruction is that as radical and as prophetic their visions may have been, I think they took care to explain, both Dr. King and Congressman Lewis, that they were not coming up with this vision out of the blue, that that vision was grounded in Reconstruction, that the beloved community that Dr. King spoke of and the egalitarian society that Congressman Lewis spent much of his life working for wasn't something that they were simply idealistically invented. It was something that they urged us did exist for a while during Reconstruction. And that for a very, very brief moment between Dred Scott and Plessy, for a brief moment between the Civil War and Jim Crow, for a brief moment between Southern cotton plantations and Northern segregated ghettos, for a brief moment between the charnel house of Gettysburg and the strange fruits hanging from Southern trees, the society of chattel slavery had fallen into pieces and had not yet rebuilt itself into the state of racial apartheid everything seemed, again for a brief moment during construction, possible, everything changing, everything in flux. So I cannot help but think that these two speeches taken together and put together, and the arc of the lives of these two men taken together and put together, has always been an invitation to go back and find again and revive that Reconstruction moment, or as James Baldwin put it so long ago, that one day perhaps, unimaginable generations hence, we will evolve into the knowledge that human beings are more important than real estate, and will permit this knowledge to become the ruling principle of our lives. For I do not for an instant doubt, and will go to my grave believing that we can build Jerusalem if we will. Thank you for allowing me to join you today.
Thank you so much, Professor Francois, for accepting our invitation. My neurons are all on fire because I just learned so much from you in the last 15 minutes. So thank you for bringing these two men and their two speeches together and bringing us to that brief moment, as you said, and then ending on what is, I know for so many of us, one of our favorite quotations by James Baldwin. So thank you so much. Friends and community, we are going to take an exactly 3-minute stretch bio break. Amina is going to play a song for us. And when we come back, my friend and colleague Todd Shell Young will be on your screen pinned with our 3 speakers. And she will be having a short dialogue and Q&A session with our 3 speakers. So I have 12:59 on our clock. So I'll see you back here around 1:02, 1:03. Thank you. Not sure if we lost our ability to do music. Jocelyn, do you know?
It's coming.
Okay, we'll still have our little break.
For the man, too much for So he's leaving the life he's come to know. Ooh. He said he's going back to find. Going back to find. Ooh, what's left of his world. The world he left behind not so long ago. He's leaving on that midnight train to Georgia. Yeah, said he's going back to a simpler place and time. Oh yes he is. Now be with him on that midnight train to Georgia. I'd rather live in his word than live without him in mine. World is his and hers alone. He kept dreaming, ooh, that someday he'd be a star, a superstar, but he didn't get far. But he sure found out the hard way that dreams don't always come true. So he climbed all his hopes, and he even sold his old car. Bought a one-way ticket back to the life he once knew. Oh yes he did. He said he would. Oh, he's leaving on that midnight train to Georgia. Said he's going back to find, ooh, a simpler place and time. Oh, yeah, not gonna be with him on that midnight train to Georgia. I'd rather live in his world than live without him in mine. Said he's going back to find, ooh, a simpler place and time. Ooh, yo, I've got to be with him. Oh, that midnight train, Georgia. I'd rather live in his world than live without him in mine.
Brother, what's up? This is a groovy party, man. Yeah, brother, like it. Stop. Right on. Hey, man, what's your name?
Mother, mother, there's too many of you crying. Brother, 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 there's far too many of you dying. You know we've got to find a way to bring some loving here today. Yeah. Father, Father, we don't need to.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining back with us in this incredible opportunity to talk to our three speakers. I'm blown away just as much as everyone else has communicated in the chat, and I look forward to our very short conversation that we're about to have now. Again, I am Todd Shell Young, and I work in the Hub for Innovation and Equity and Innovation in Higher Education, and it is a pleasure to be here with you all. So what we will do, I have 3 questions, one for each of you, and I'll go in the order in which you have spoken today. And then we will take some questions from our guests as well on the call. So if you'd like to put your questions in the chat, I'm sure you have several, that would be fabulous. And I'll do my absolute best to make sure that we capture them and we ask away. All right, so again, thank you all for being here. And we'll start with Fatima. So, man, girl, let me tell you, I had to, brace myself a couple times. I was like, man, I don't even know where to start here. There's so much that I'd love to ask you, especially as a student, as a senior who has experienced Georgetown over the last 4 years. It's been a privilege to watch you grow and have interacted with you in quite a few spaces. And the question that I have for you, it's around the notion of liberation through performance. That was a very powerful piece that I wanted to touch on. Not all of us are professionals like you are. So I like to sing in the mirror and act on my free time, right, in the closet. But as we all know, we're all not professionals, and tapping into what performance is for us, especially when connecting to ourselves in such a manner. You talked about this sense of awareness. And for those who have not had the opportunity to practice meditation in this way, especially in the framework that you mentioned in terms of liberation, what advice would you give to students, staff, faculty, or friends of Georgetown about reaching into themselves and tapping into their truth, especially being comfortable in doing so while we're in the midst of this revolution?
Big question. I would start off by saying, first with the part about performance as a source of liberation. I always relate the two, because when it comes to acting, I have a very specific approach about it. And this is on the acting realm or on the performance realm, but for an actor's job is the business of emotions and the business of the interior and things that I will never be able to explain to you. But there's work that you do inside in acting, and in which you're trying to find a way to give validation to that interior space. So, if I'm an actor and it's whatever, I'm sad, to give my interior sadness validation, I express sadness, whether that be through tears. Kerry Washington got her little lip quiver. We all have something that is a manifestation of the interior. And I think in our day-to-day actions, we should be working towards manifesting our interior, meaning you're working towards manifesting your emotions because it makes no sense to keep them in, and it makes sense to communicate, or it makes sense to just make sense of them. And the things that I consider intuitive, I also consider subconscious or unconscious or whatever that word would be. And just the act of giving yourself space to think about it in itself is mindfulness, whether that be a journal entry or a meditation in which you just think about the details of something. And I very much was telling Jamae about this before. I feel like this is just Soul. If you just go watch Soul on Disney Plus, and that's the essence. It's just allowing yourself to actively live life. And I think that needs to be present within the liberation movement as well.
I have a follow-up question to that. What's one thing, in addition to, maybe journaling or meditating, that somebody can do? What's the action piece here? If meditation or journaling doesn't come natural to people to get those emotions out. As we know, a lot of people have a tough time showing their emotions, or, as many people say, wearing their emotions on their sleeve. So what is an act to be able to express that?
Speaking from my experiences, I would say, and I probably heard therapy was a very big solution for that. I'm an actor, but I don't know how to express my own emotions. That's a fact. I would even realize I would go into therapy and she would be like, you're not really telling me about your feelings. You're just telling me stories. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I'm telling you what happened. And she's like, no, like, you're not telling me your emotions or your experience about it. And she actually gave me this wheel of literally just simply words. And I'm very big on words, of like, it kind of spreads out from like sadness and then anger, happiness, different things like that. And it gives you more specific words. But I guess it's really just pinpointing it. Sometimes I don't even give myself the opportunity to differentiate between things. For example, during the school year, I was really stressed about school. I don't know why. Like, this is now like year 4. I kind of was just like, you know, like, I know how to do this, but everything just feels so wrong. And when I went inside, like, and when I was just thinking about like how I really felt, I was like, I think I told one of my advisors, like, I just feel like I am just, I don't want to use the word I use, but I'm just doing work people are just telling me to do. And I was like, okay, but that's not it. Like, that's not the issue here. Like, people are just telling you to do work. You signed up for school. Like, let's not act like you didn't sign up for it. And I'm like, no, I just feel like if I do this work, does it really matter? Am I going to be validated? And then I realized my work needs validation. If my work is not validated, I start feeling down, sad, like unaccomplished. And I don't know if I have any more specifics, but just really like, I honestly don't think a lot of people take the time to even like come up with just more words for your emotions. Like, we don't have a wide vocabulary for emotions, and moments of quiet as well. We don't experience often. And there's like a lot of times just no answers. I really believe strongly in like just sitting in silence, and what comes to you is what you were supposed to receive.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I wanted to follow up because especially during this time of turmoil, it is, you know, tapping into ourselves is a very real thing. Some of us are left with our own emotions and still trying to show up to class, show up to work, show up to the office as if nothing is happening, as if everything should go on as normal, whatever normal is, and you shouldn't express how you feel, or you know, if you feel an urge to cry, or if you're sad, like, you know, it's like, well, nobody wants to hear that. And, you know, especially, which is going to transition me to my next questions for you, not doctor, but Mr. Collins. You know, thinking about the things that you want to do, whether it's expressing that or doing it with an action. And it's like, well, am I actually willing to risk so much to do this? And how do I grapple with my feelings and my emotions, and, you know, with thinking about my next step or that next phase or that next action that might quite literally cost me my life or my career or some situation. So thank you so much for explaining as much as you could. So Mr. Collins, on this notion of doing something that you would or risk or give your life, you know, you would risk or give your life for, that you mentioned from the words and perspective of Representative Lewis, getting in good trouble. I used to use that a lot in the last couple of years. One, because I am an activist at heart, but sometimes I feel like I have to shield a little bit, you know, to navigate these different professional journeys. And I'm sure students who feel called to go to the front lines, or even staff, you know, when we feel called to go to the front lines to do, you know, the good old work for Georgetown or beyond, you know, getting in that good trouble. I am curious to know, you know, having spent so much time and so much of your career alongside of Representative Lewis, what were 2 of the greatest lessons you've learned from him, and what lifelong actions do you hope to uphold?
I think just witnessing, as I mentioned, just being a man of principle and integrity. I mean, even when I read back to his speech in 1963, he talked about, you know, the people, the politicians, and talked about, you know, their lack of integrity and, you know, knowing and deciphering the difference between seeing them. But he was always a man of principle, and he believed in his heart. And as I mentioned again, it was based on his faith. It was a direct link to his early beginnings and his faith, which guided him from his entire life, for his entire life. And so I just really feel strongly that as a man of principle and a man of integrity, it was just a witness to be able to walk alongside him every day and know that, nothing could compromise that, absolutely nothing. And so that was really the experience I had, and I would take away. And I would continue, I try every day. I ask myself, are you a man of integrity? And how do you maintain that when you're faced with so much, especially today? I mean, a lot of the things that we're faced with in today's society are very different than what the congressman faced. And so, for me, I have to ask myself, what would I do? And how would I stand in the shadows of the congressman, but also hold just as high of a standard? And so that's what I every day think about trying to live toward going forward.
Wow, thank you so much. Just a follow-up to that, are there any service-based work that you do that you think that others, whether in this community, in this space, can tap into to help us uplift the legacy of Representative Lewis?
No, he would just say, find something so meaningful and important for your life and for the greater good of others, and just go for it. Just get involved, and make it yours, own it. And I would encourage that as well. I mean, I think about that every day, to take something, circumstance outside of yourself that's greater, and just devote yourself to it. And that's what he did. It was a life calling.
Wow, so simple, but so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So powerful. Just go do it.
Yeah, just do it.
If we all just like
it doesn't cost anything. It does. I mean, it doesn't. I mean, really, if you believe it, injustice, you find something wrong, something unjust, just get out there, and it's so funny because early on in my work with congressmen, I used to be like, is it really that simple? I mean, is it really that simple? And the complicated times of his life, I asked, is it really that simple, Congressman? And he said, it actually is. Because you have to believe. You have to believe in yourself, and you have to believe that you can make a difference.
Thank you so much. There's so much that I just go do it, Todd Shell. So I appreciate that so much. So simple, but so powerful. Thank you so much. And for Professor Francois, thank you for the history lesson. And thank you so much for walking us through and diving into the speech in a way that I didn't think about. I want to go into that, to the Reconstruction era, as you started to talk about, especially as a turning point for our society, our democracy, right? And knowing that it feels like it was so long ago. Yes, it was 100 and few years away, but it feels really critical for right now. So as a professor and as a person who practiced law, and I'm sure you do so many other things, from those different perspectives, how can students, scholars, protesters, or curious citizens use the information or lessons or perspectives from this era to transform our governmental and educational institutions today?
Thank you for the question. And I think it probably would take all afternoon to answer it. It's a great question. Here's what I would say. I think nowadays there's a lot of focus, and widely so, in Reconstruction, right? People are drawing some parallels between, say, the election and the administration of Barack Obama leading to the election of Donald Trump. The idea being that Reconstruction led to a backlash in Jim Crow, and Obama led to a backlash to Trump. I think folks are also correctly pointing out that what happened on Capitol Hill on the 6th is yet another piece of evidence, if we needed more, of the extent to which white supremacy was not fully or at all extinguished after Reconstruction. But from studying that period, I tend to take a different lesson from it, which I think is what Dr. King and Congressman Lewis also took. Namely, that I think we underestimate the extent to which the period, albeit very short, during Reconstruction, can serve as a model for us. That there was a moment in time when you had evidence in this country of the way in which a multiracial society grounded in human rights, political equality, and economic opportunity could be made to work. That the daily lives of people during Reconstruction during that short period was rather extraordinarily radical, right? You had so many instances all around the country of evidence of multiracial governments, right? You had folks demanding rights that were unheard of. In other words, the vast majority of the civil rights legislation that were passed and proposed in Reconstruction were more radical than what we're proposing today. So what I find extraordinary for me about Dr. King, Congress, and Lewis is that these were not fuzzy-headed thinkers who were living in an idealized world. The reason why Congressman Lewis seemed to be so adamant for his entire life that the world he was imagining was possible because he knew it once existed, right? So that's the lesson that I would take for it. So therefore, I think when I keep pushing people to study Reconstruction, what I want to focus on is not the fact that it failed. It is not the fact that it led to a white backlash. It is not the fact that it led to KKK violence. It's the fact that for a few short years, we had an example of what a multiracial, just society could look like.
Wow. And it also begs the question, like, I know there's a lot of historical texts and speeches that talk about like what really went wrong. And you talked about it a little bit, and it's like, okay, we had this really short period of like, for me, and of course my very short life, it feels like utopia. It's like a utopic United States, especially since we are very familiar with, the forefathers, if you will, and how this university too, and this country was built, and how it became the country that it is today. So the fact that we had this period of time that seemed like this is what we're fighting to go back to, but better. It's like, where do we go from here? Like, how do we go back to that? Like, do we want to go back to that? And I think it was Fatima who also mentioned the notion of separation and segregation. They feel like the same thing, like there doesn't feel like a difference. But during that time, it seemed like there was a difference there. Segregation was still very real. Separation, things were still separate, but there could be some business and, some business happening. And I know quite a few people who were Black or Native started getting into other institutions that were not historically offered to them. So it's like, okay, well, we had that. How do we go back? And how do we, again, it's really hard to think about it in these times where, especially if you go downtown, you see our nation's capital look like a fortress, right? It's like we're fighting against ourselves for something that we all want. What do we do with that? And that could be a question for any of you.
One last thing I'll say, because I know that we want to have a broader discussion about this. The irony of all this is that the overwhelming majority of civil rights activism that took place during Reconstruction, pushing for political, economic, and social right, and I swear to you, this is going to sound deeply familiar, were actually brought, advocated for, pushed for, by, of all people, Black women. That the entire model of civil rights progressivism during Reconstruction, I know we always, and deservedly so, talk about Frederick Douglass, but if you go back and look at all these cases that were being brought, it was Black women who were basically advancing a vision of human rights that focused not just on political equality, but also economic opportunity and social equality. Which I think is the reason why there is so much we can draw as inspiration for how we can remake this world, you know.
Did anyone else want to contribute before we ask the question in the chat? Okay. All right, we have a pretty long question, and this one is for you, Professor. It says, it's about the importance of precision in language. It's part of the problem that we continue to talk about Reconstruction, quote unquote, failing. Reconstruction did not fail. The election of 1872 was the most biracial in our history. Reconstruction worked. It was not what failed. Those who came afterward failed Reconstruction. I think it is important we talk about it in that way, because otherwise there is no incentive to try again. So maybe would it help if instead of talking about how Reconstruction failed us, we talk about how we have failed and continue to fail Reconstruction?
I think that's a good question. And I think you're absolutely right. And I shouldn't have used that word fail because, again, there were a lot of things about Reconstruction that were successful. And even to the extent that it stopped, it didn't fail. People killed it, I suppose, including the Supreme Court, among other things, right? And you're right about the election of 1872. You're right about the fact that around the country, particularly in former Confederate states, South Carolina, North Carolina, Louisiana, Georgia, even Florida, you had example of multiracial governments. Governments from the moment that they came into power, the first thing that they did, the very first thing that they did was basically say, let's see how we can pass a legislation that's going to work for everyone, including poor whites, right? So yes, I think I completely agree with the question. It was my mistake to use that word, that Reconstruction in some sense didn't fail. In some ways it was murdered in its infancy. And I think it's up to us to continue to get inspiration from it.
Thank you so much. Before I pass the mic over to Maya, I'd like to ask you all to share something with us. What, after having heard everyone's speeches and the question that we just had and a few questions that I had the privilege of asking you all, what is something that you'd like to share with the audience? What's the first thing that comes to your mind or to your heart?
I would just echo, the congressman in terms of being optimistic. He often talked about despair. He always talked about keeping your head up. We've seen some difficult times recently. But I will tell you, if he was here, he'd be devastated. But he also would just instill just such optimism and hope for the future. He would talk about young people and talk about the belief that they have the capacity to change the outcome, and his belief in them. And I feel so strongly about that as well. I mean, there's just so much good to come. There's a lot of work to do, always, but just to stay optimistic, because we will continue to move forward. And our belief in society and ourselves and young people makes all the difference.
Thank you so much for sharing.
I would say for me, just having so many professors and staff on the call, just really build curriculum from a sense of care this semester, if you can. This is really unprecedented times, like it's times where everyone is trying to literally figure things out. And I feel like there are value in the insights that we come to figure out in our day-to-day that necessarily aren't always found in some form of what you think is important, and that's okay. So really give space to students to help. I think a community of care gives space for people to feel comfortable to voice where they're at and what they're doing, for there to be changes that can be made in the curriculum. And then I'll also say for students, I think one of the things just listening to older people speak recently has just been we were not there. We really were not there. And the conceptions that we have of that past are manipulated. And if you think they aren't, like, they just kind of are. So I really like going back and just listening to like your I don't want to say ancestors in a sense, but older people have so much knowledge and experience, perception, and no one's saying you have to resonate with everything, but it's what you find a sense of satisfaction in as you listen to these things. But there are always new sources of knowledge. Yeah.
I want to make sure I'm not muted. It's hard for me to put it into words, but here's what I'll say. You know, I grew up as a Catholic. I was educated as a young kid by Jesuits. And whatever quarrels me and the Jesuits may have had over the years, the one thing that has always stayed with me from my Jesuit education is this notion that it's okay to struggle, it's okay to have doubt, so long as your struggle and your doubt is always grounded in a willingness to keep studying, to keep thinking about things, to search for some version of truth. I don't know what's going to happen. And I think, like most of you, the events of January 6th, though not entirely surprising, you know, were shocking to see how fragile things can be. But, and I got this invitation to speak with you today at the last minute, but I took it because I think things like this, you know, it's not so much that it gives me hope, but it sort of continues to emphasize for me the need to keep thinking, the need to keep studying, the need to keep struggling, as the Jesuits say, towards something better. I know I'm being coherent, but that's the only thing I can think about right now.
It's coherent. We follow, and for sharing that. We hear you. Thank you all so very much. It's been a pleasure to have this time with you. And I'm going to transfer the mic to Maya.
Thank you, Todd Shell. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maya Aduba Williams. I serve as the program manager for the Office of Student Equity and Inclusion. And on behalf of the Teach the Speech Planning Committee, I would like to thank all of you for joining us today in this program. To our keynote speakers and moderators, we thank you for your time, dedication, and commitment to this work. We gathered today not even 60 years after Dr. King's speech, Our God is Marching On, was given, a speech which remains just as relevant today as it ever has. Your participation today is evident that there is a strong desire to honor Dr. King's life and legacy, and that there is strength in community when the shared value is to promote justice, diversity, and care for one another. I encourage all of you to continue engaging in opportunities to commemorate Dr. King's speech through the resources provided in this chat that I'm going to share with you. This research can be used as supplemental material for you all, for those of you who wish to continue teaching this speech in your courses, or simply to just learn more about the context of both speeches that were discussed today. And for access to today's program recording, I will drop the link in the chat as well. But thank you all again, and I hope that you all are safe and well. Thank you.
Thank you.